I'm Vicki Hogarth and welcome to Southwest Magazine. On today's episode, I'll be sitting down with Chief Medical Officer of New Brunswick, Dr. Jennifer Russell, to discuss how COVID-19 is affecting border communities in Southwest New Brunswick and what precautions need to be taken here. But first, Isabelle Gagne and Renate Gritter will be joining us from St. Stephen's University to explain how COVID-19 has affected life and learning at Canada's smallest university.
I'm Isabelle Gagne, a student in her second year at St. Stephen's University, and today my partner Renate Gritter, a student in her final year, will be sitting down to talk to Dr. Margaret Anne Smith, president of SSU, to discuss the new normal within education systems during the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you so much for being willing to participate in this interview. It's really great being able to interview you.
I'm glad. I'm happy to be here.
So I wanted to start off with a bit on the place that we both love, because a lot of people don't know how unique St. Stephen's University is. So how would you describe St. Stephen's University, or SSU, to someone who has never heard of it before?
That's a great question. It's not an easy thing to do in the COVID age when you can't come in and wander around the building and meet the people, because the people make the place. Our tagline is that we're Canada's smallest university, but there's a lot more to us than that. And I like to think of us as the two circles that meet in the middle of a Venn diagram. I'm no mathematician, but I like those visuals. So if one circle is we're a university, the other one is we're a community. We're in fact both, where those two things overlap. So we have all the major attributes of a huge university. Obviously, all the academics and library and research, and we all write and are qualified to be students and faculty. But we're also a community in the very best sense of that. That's why we stay small. We value meals together. We value students working and cleaning and cooking together. We value travel together. And to me, our scale means that we can personalize the working experience as well as the learning and the living experience. And I think that's really our distinctive.
So before you became SSU's president and chief academic officer, and after you taught at SSU for 17 years, you were an assistant professor at the University of New Brunswick in St. John. Why make the switch back to SSU after teaching at a larger university? And what has transitioning from a university like UNB SJ to SSU, especially during such a strange time?
It is a strange time, but why not transition in a strange time? I think this time makes us realize what our basic priorities are, what we really value the most. I had great colleagues and great teaching experience at UNB St. John. I was also director of the Teaching and Learning Center, so I did a lot of work with faculty as well as teaching, and I really liked both of those things. But ultimately, I realized I missed the small size of the community. I teach English literature. I really value the liberal arts, and that is highly subjective, and because our fields of inquiry and the things that we study, the things we read, the ideas we talk about are so very personal. I think we can get better answers to our own questions if we're in a smaller cohort. So that you asked me to do this interview, I said, but of course, Renate. Whereas, if we were at UNB St. John, I would know your name and you would know mine, but it would be harder to get a piece of my time because I would have many, many more students. I would probably have 20 times as many students as I do right now, for instance. And I think learning to ask the right questions is the key to answering some of the questions for your own life and experience. And education is about the now, but it's also about the future. And I think that you can get a better custom experience in a smaller place. I mean, a lot of the burden of learning is on the student. It's not your prof, it's not the library size, it's not the number of resources at your disposal. But those things are not insignificant, right? So we offer students an experience, and it's a personalized one.
In your profile on SSU's website, you describe SSU as, quote, a small academic community where students, faculty, staff, and neighbors form values that shape our lives together. What does that look like at SSU? And how has SSU continued to do that during the pandemic?
I really value this piece of the province. I'm a New Brunswicker. I'm one of the few on faculty, actually. I grew up in New Brunswick and came home to build my life here. So I value the conversations that we can have as a university, particularly within this community, and I think that's increasingly important to us. COVID is revealing a lot of things about resources, who has privilege, who doesn't. There's not a lot of access to education in rural parts of Canada for sure. Not easy to get a higher education. If you choose to remain in Charlotte County, it's a long drive to other campuses, most of them. So I think it's important that we start to branch out and involve conversations with our neighbors here a lot more. And we do offer part-time, full-time opportunities to people who are interested in what we are doing at SSU. And I really value conversation as a method of learning. It's what I've always valued in my classroom. The classroom is my happy place, and I want to hear from my students, and I want them to hear from me. It's a give and take. And that's one of the highlights for me in terms of working here. Our students actually expect that. Bigger institutions with bigger classes, a student can kind of slink into the back of the lecture hall, listen carefully, go away, have great ideas, write great papers for me, but there's no conversation. There's no back and forth, sometimes until the very end of term when the final paper comes in or the essays due. I think we all learn better, profs included. I'm always learning. We all learn better if we're held accountable on at least a weekly basis, as we are in a classroom where people expect to ask questions and have them answered as best we can.
So right now, SSU actually only has a dozen students or so who live on campus and a handful more that come in from off campus. If someone were to ask you, why bother trying to live together in person when it's such a hassle to practice social distancing? Why not move everything online like a lot of other big universities have? If they were to ask you that, how would you respond?
I've already emphasized the personal nature of what we do. That would be much more difficult to achieve. We have limited tech abilities at this point, and it takes a while to get up to speed in terms of technical resources. We are doing better. We do have obviously 2 programs that are mostly online right now. So a certificate program, which is always taught really well online, it was designed that way. And I think that's one of the keys to rolling out good learning experiences for students is in the design. We have a graduate program that's gone online as well, but that is designed on a modular basis. So students would normally come to St. Stephen for a couple of weeks and do the rest of their learning remotely. But our undergraduate program is designed to be in the classroom, in the kitchen, on the road, traveling, for instance, going to Europe, going to Asia. So we've really had to pull in our scope. But we realized that our students are looking for that personal experience, and that if we went online, I was afraid we'd lose them. Afraid that people would go to U of T, Harvard. There are all kinds of places where you can do optimal online experiences because the bigger schools have designed learning that way, and we design learning to be done person to person. So we're sticking with it. We do have students who are beaming into our classes, as we say. We're still teaching in person, but some are connecting virtually. It's working out pretty well for students who couldn't get here or for health reasons chose not to be here, for family reasons needed to be at home. I think we're doing okay. We look forward to a return to whatever normal is going to look like in future.
Once social distancing guidelines are lifted, what do you think educators will do differently than they did during the pandemic? And what are you really looking forward to going back to being the exact same as it was before?
Oh, not wearing a mask in the workplace is an initial relief, I think, for all of us. I think it'll be a physical relief. As I said, I love being in the classroom and I feel like I belong there, but I don't now. We walk in, we're afraid to touch things, or has this been cleaned, or can I pick this up? How do I pass out photocopies? I'm not supposed to touch something and give it to you, right? I'm teaching behind plexiglass. It's a fairly difficult experience. It's hard to hear, it's hard to see. So I think physical occupation of our comfortable space will just be a huge relief for all of us. probably especially for students, right? I have more control over my environment currently than my students do. But I think we're learning some pretty important lessons too. We have all taught online to some extent since March. We had an online summer course I participated in. I did some online teaching at UNB at the end of things, as well as here last winter term. And we're realizing that the obvious online method of learning is a little bit like this one. It's to make a video. And I do a classic lecture, and that gets recorded, and students are expected to sit and listen and then wander off and do their homework, whatever that is comprised of. There's been lots of work done in educational psychology that suggests that is not a good way to learn on a permanent basis. A great lecture is a great thing, don't get me wrong, but it's not the only way to learn. In fact, we know now from educational psychology that students learn best if they hear something and see something and practice talking about something and write about something, and then actually apply that as best they can, maybe even do something depending on the course. So we're learning to vary that possibility in the classroom. Over the last couple of decades, people have been a lot more explicit about varying learning and thinking more about active ways of owning ideas and owning skills and practices. It's hard to do online, but we are learning that there are ways to do that. People have been talking about something called the flipped classroom for a long time. That means that as a student, you would read the content yourself. I don't lecture you about it. And then when we get together, either in the classroom or online, we do the interactive parts as best we can. So whether that's conversation in my class about literature, maybe it's experimentation in a chemistry class, for instance, the hands-on pieces of things. Could be internships, right? So I think that challenging our normal methods of teaching and learning in a pandemic, whether it's accommodating space or numbers or online or blended, makes us realize that variety is in fact the answer to a good post-secondary experience. And that's something that we're going to keep forever. And maybe it means that sometimes accessibility is improved for a lot of students by getting online access to most of the things we do. If you can't get to class, there is no daycare, or you're sick, or your partner requires care, or you live in a rural part of the country. Online opens up real possibilities for people. So I don't think we'll ever go back to just in person again. I think we'll always have some blended opportunities. Probably not all our classes, not all lend themselves well to that. Not every instructor wants to do that, and we like to give instructors freedom to choose the methods that work best for them. Students sense what's comfortable for profs. And some students prefer different kinds of learning as well. So this is a moment, I think, to realize, okay, what are the essentials? What can we do without? What do we need to keep? And how can we offer things better in future? As one thing about pandemic, we have our eye on the future all the time. When are things going to change? When are things going to get easier? Yeah, so we're thinking about that from an educational point of view as well, not just an operational day-to-day point of view.
So you outlined a lot of different challenges that educators have been facing in the last couple of seasons. What are some of the things that keep you motivated to stick to educating even when it's tough?
I think education offers people hope. I think that's the main goal, in fact, of education. In some cases, it's credentialing. In some cases, it's skills training. But it's always about an investment in the future. And I think right now, with the future, particularly for a generation like yours that hasn't really entered into the world after education yet in a major way, the future is pretty uncertain right now. So I think this is a really good time to be in school, to return to school, even to take a course or two. And I think that's what we offer, is this chance, this privileged moment in time to sit and ask ourselves, what do we really care about? What do we want the world to look like? Certainly COVID has challenged a lot of our assumptions in our part of the world, but people have raised big questions everywhere about power, about privilege, about access, about fairness, about justice. This is a great time to be, reading the history of the human race, for instance, and seeing what has worked and what hasn't, trying out different ideas, practicing different solutions for ourselves. And that doesn't feel like we're changing the world, but studying and reading and writing and articulating and arguing and having your opinion changed actually does change the world, because when we finish school, we take those ideas on into the future. So I think of this as a kind of a time of incubation, maybe. It's a good time to be a student. It's a hard time to be working in the world because so many people are out of work. So why not press pause and take the time to think about, okay, when we go back to normal, quote unquote normal, what should that look like? It hasn't been great for so many people up until COVID. And COVID is revealing a lot more of the problems in major ways, right? So that's one of the benefits, I think, of a liberal arts education, is we think about the past, we take a close look at the present, and we dare imagine what the future might look like based on what we've learned from the past. So it might actually be an exciting time. I look forward to 25 years from now, when this is history, and we can look back and ask ourselves, did we take advantage of the moment to ask the questions?
Good words to end on. Thank you so much again for your time.
That was Margaret Anne Smith, president of St. Stephen's University, interviewed by Renate Gritter in a segment produced by Isabelle Gagne and Renate Gritter. Next, here's my interview with Dr. Jennifer Russell. Dr. Russell, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Vicki.
I know that you recently had a meeting with municipal leaders from across southwest New Brunswick, particularly in border town areas. What inspired that meeting, and what were some of the concerns they expressed about the international border and New Brunswickers in particular who are crossing over as essential workers, or from Campobello Island, for instance, who are going over for groceries?
So I wasn't part of that meeting directly, but certainly the Regional Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Kim Barker, was part of that meeting. And I know our communications folks here were also involved in making sure that the messaging was very clear around what the risks were and what people needed to do to deal with those risks. All of the things we learned in the outbreak in Zone 5 are very critical right now in terms of transmission of COVID-19 when you are close to a border situation where there are a high number of cases and essential workers and things like that, and community transmission. So there's a combination of risks that are increasing around us outside the Atlantic bubble, in Maine, also the rest of Canada. And when you look at Europe and England, there are many lockdowns happening right now because this second wave is actually worse than the first wave. So right now in Charlotte County, the specific risks that we want to really manage right now are the increasing number of cases in Maine. They actually are recording record number of daily cases, and I know there are some jurisdictions in Maine that are imposing stricter public health measures to deal with that. So the messaging that we wanted the community leaders to have, and again, this is a lesson learned from our outbreak in Zone 5 around making sure that everybody had the right information so they could really amplify the message and make sure that the public would hear the messages and internalize them in a way that they could act upon them and change the behaviors that were really putting people at risk. So we know that wearing masks is very important in both Zone 1 and Zone 5 outbreaks. Transmission was happening when people were not wearing masks, especially in workplaces, when they were working, and also when they were on breaks. We know that transmission in both Zone 1 and Zone 5 was happening because people were not getting tested when they had very mild symptoms. So we know that that was a driver of the outbreaks, and we want people in Charlotte County to feel very comfortable getting tested, and we want them to get tested even if they have very mild symptoms. And the other thing that we know was driving transmission for sure up in the north in Zone 5 was the number of close contacts. So one of the really important messages is decreasing your number of close contacts. And again, when we see the risks increasing across Canada, in other parts of the world, and including our neighbors in Maine, it's really important to keep your close contact numbers as low as possible. This is a recommendation. We don't have it in the mandatory order in terms of an upper limit, but certainly in these increasing risks in terms of the number of cases we're seeing going up, it's very important in terms of stopping an outbreak quite early and making sure that it doesn't affect a large part of the community. We do know that people have to travel for essential reasons, and there's no question about that, and that's going to continue. But what can we do to make that travel safer? We are offering testing regularly for essential workers several times a week on a voluntary basis at this point in time, with a modified work isolation and self-isolation with that. But the other thing that we know through the outbreak with Zone 5 is the family connections are really important and strong in a community like Charlotte County, in a community like Hamilton and Dalhousie and Zone 5. And those family connections are really important. But in a pandemic and in an outbreak situation, it really is important to minimize those contacts. So we know that people do travel across the border for essential reasons, but we also know that people travel across the border to visit friends and family and also to do some shopping. So if people could minimize the non-essential parts of their travel and only travel for work, that would help in terms of decreasing the risks. And if people could make sure that they're not doing extra traveling and increasing those risks in terms of coming into contact with people who may be infected, because the other thing we saw in both outbreaks in Zone 1 and Zone 5 is some of the transmission happened with people who did not have any symptoms. So that's a big risk as well. Again, Maine CDC, their website is showing record number of increased daily cases. Canada is showing an increased record number of daily cases. The US is showing an increased, like a record-breaking daily increases in cases, as are parts of Europe and England. So we just know that all around us, people are going back into red. New Brunswick doesn't want to do that. No part of New Brunswick wants to go back into orange or red. And so again, we saw what it took to deal with the outbreak up north. We saw what it took to deal with the outbreak in Zone 1. And we just really don't want those things to happen anywhere else. And we do want people to make sure they have the right information so that they know how to prevent those outbreaks and how to keep them small and short so that they don't affect the healthcare system, and they don't affect the economy, and they don't affect people's mental health.
Now, I know public health issued some guidelines. Let's talk first about essential workers. What are things that you might be asking them not to do now in terms of maybe picking up things for other people or doing errands that they don't have to do in a different country?
Exactly. So obviously, border communities have special relationships with not only their families and friends, but also the retail locations and other types of businesses. But at this time, we're really asking people to not do anything above and beyond the essential work that they are traveling to do. So making extra stops to visit people, making extra stops to pick up things at stores. Not really recommended right now because we know the risks are increasing so much, and it's the only way to protect Charlotte County at this point in time in terms of those increasing risks.
And so some of the responsibility, I assume, falls on the people in the community not to also ask for these favors.
Exactly. Obviously, if we know that the risks are getting higher every day, then everything that we can do collectively, each individual citizen needs to do their part to protect themselves as well as the community, as well as the healthcare system and their hospital, and also their economy. So I do know there are challenges there, and I don't doubt that this is challenging. But I do know that it is necessary for everybody to follow the public health guidance right now, because again, lessons learned from the north and from Zone 1, these are the things that are required to keep us safe, to keep us in the yellow.
Mm-hmm. As far as essential workers go, they might be there for an 8-9 hour shift. When it comes to lunch breaks, are you recommending packed lunches? Is it better to not eat in restaurants? What do they do about that hour that they might normally go out into the community in a different country?
Well, again, we're talking about decreasing risks. So the least risky thing to do is to not go beyond the workplace. And so that's what the recommendation would be.
Okay, and Campobello obviously has a unique situation where they are allowed to go across the border to get essential goods, not necessarily all the way to St. Stephen, but shop in the neighboring border town of Lubec, Maine. We have heard some stories of people going further than Lubec, so I'd wonder what your advice would be for people on Campobello in terms of where, if they are going to go into Maine to get essential goods, should they limit that to an area? Should they limit the amount of time?
Yes, I think we're saying, I think we're suggesting twice a week and really for essential things only, and really the close the closest place possible. Again, it's all about decreasing the risks, and the consequences of those increasing risks can have a really negative impact on our ability to deal with outbreaks. The outbreak in Zone 5 took pretty much the entire province in terms of the public health teams to deal with, and that took about a month to get under control. The one in Moncton in Zone 1 took about 2 weeks to get under control. It was much smaller, but certainly, again, any outbreak is challenging, and these are all the things we're recommending to decrease the risk of having an outbreak and decreasing the risk of having that outbreak be so large that it really impacts the economy, people's mental health, and the hospital system.
Okay. And essential goods, in your opinion, should that be limited to groceries? At what point could they go to, say, a hardware store? Should there certain things they drive to St. Stephen for?
Well, again, essential probably does include things at a hardware store. And it's all about managing that risk. We know the risks are higher every single day. The number of cases in Maine are going up every single day. And again, same thing is happening across Canada. The risks are increasing globally every single day. So the steps that we need to take, the actions that we need to take are to really decrease those risks, because we have this very precious bubble. We have this really precious area in the Atlantic bubble in New Brunswick that we're able to do a lot of things that other places are not going to be able to do right now. So it is important to stay vigilant. It is important to wear your masks. It is important to wash your hands. It is important to physically distance. And the most important thing is to decrease your number of close contacts. There is a recommendation in British Columbia, for example. Again, they are having record-breaking increases in daily number of cases. They're recommending that you have a household plus 6 people in your bubble in terms of your safe 6, in terms of decreasing those risks. We have seen in the outbreak in Zone 5 where people had upwards of 25 to 30 close contacts. That is a lot of contact tracing, and that is a lot of people that have to then self-isolate when they are called as from public health to let them know that they're close contacts of somebody who tested positive. So really keeping that number as small as possible. Again, we're making recommendations. We're not putting it in the mandatory order, but we certainly need people to be aware that the risks are increasing so much that we do really need people to listen. We do really need everybody to dig deep and do what they can to keep us in yellow all around the province.
Mm-hmm. The state of Maine just recently changed their own guidelines around masks to make them stronger. But I am wondering if they do change those again, if they do get lighter, do you recommend New Brunswickers when they're in Maine to continue following the guidelines for our own province?
Absolutely. Increasing. I mean, we are recommending that people wear masks when they go to public spaces indoors. And so that would apply when they go to the States, especially. Again, the risks are higher in the US right now than they are here. So the safer that people can be and the more things that they can do to stay safe, the better. Because again, we can't stop the fact that the numbers are increasing all around us. But what we can do is affect how we behave as New Brunswickers to decrease our risks and to decrease our risks of having outbreaks that, again, these things impact the health service delivery. It impacts our hospitals. It impacts the economy. It impacts people's mental health. And I know for myself, I'm looking forward to having a nice Christmas. And I think everybody in New Brunswick wants to have a nice Christmas with respect to being able to stay in the yellow phase.
Finally, I was at the St. Stephen testing site this week and saw that people were using it. Are you finding that it's been successful thus far, that it has been accessed by the community?
I don't have any new information on that. I do get updates every day, but I don't have a recent update on that. But I can only imagine that people would be using those services. And again, everything that people can do to keep their community safe is what people should be doing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Russell, and thank you for everything you continue to do for New Brunswick.
Thank you, Vicki.
That was Dr. Jennifer Russell, Chief Medical Officer of New Brunswick. I'm Vicki Hogarth. I'll see you next time on Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO-TV, New Brunswick's only source for independent community television.